Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Investment Hound podcast. This is actually our 11th episode, and Grandad, I saw an interesting statistic the other day about podcasts, okay? Did you know that 64% of podcasts in the world have less than 10 episodes? So, because this is our 11th, we're actually in the top 36 percentile of podcasts in the world that have more than 10 episodes available to their listeners. And did you know, if we were to do 50 podcasts, that puts us in the top 3.6% of all podcasts worldwide who have more than 50 episodes available to their listeners. What do you think of that, Grandad?
I think that's just wonderful.
Yeah, that's a bit of interesting news, a bit of motivating news, I think. So before we get started into this episode, I want to shout out Grandad's book. So if you haven't already gone and got yourself a copy of Grandad's new book, Successful Investing, How to Make Money in the Stock Market from Real Life Experience, make sure you go and grab yourself a copy today. You can find it on amazon.co.uk if you're here in Europe, or if you're in America, amazon.com. If you want to know what it looks like, have a look behind Grandad. Right above his head on the screen there, you'll see 3 red copies of the book. So make sure you go grab yourself a copy. If you're listening to this on YouTube, the link is in the description down below. If you're listening to on Spotify, the link is also in the description down below. The next thing, make sure you go and follow us on all social medias at The Investment Hound. We're available, well, not all social medias. We're available on Instagram and TikTok. So make sure you go follow us on those. Okay, so this episode, we're going to take a break from the series we've been doing in the past few episodes where Grandad and I have been building our portfolio using all the information we've talked about to date on the podcast and also the information from the book. So if you haven't watched those episodes, make sure you go check those out. They're very interesting and very informative, especially if you're a beginner investor. But this week, there was some very big news announced in Ireland, which they do every year. And that news is the budget for 2025. So this episode is going to be all about the budget. So let's get started. So the first question I want to ask you today, Grandad, is how does the budget for 2025 affect you?
Well, of course, what I do, Adam, whenever there's a budget speech, I get out my Excel spreadsheet and I say, am I better off or am I worse off? And if I'm better or worse off, how much am I better or worse off by? So I took all the various items that affected me. Now, they won't be the same items that would affect you, Adam, okay, or our listeners. For example, the increase in the old age pension doesn't affect you yet, Adam, and probably won't for a long time to come. So I then worked out what the after-tax implications of all of the different measures announced was. And I discovered that my disposable income monthly will go up by €105. Now, that's very good as far as I'm concerned, because it's better than a kick in the ass, and it's better than my after-tax income going down by €105. Now, I'm sure there are others that have done much better from the budget than me. And if they have, I would say it's because their needs are much higher than mine. And so I don't have any problem if people come along and say they got this amount or that amount and it's higher than my amount. But I'm comfortable with my amount. The problem with it, Adam, is that health insurance costs are rising. The premiums are going to go up significantly next year. And I reckon most of that 100 will go over to my health insurer. But isn't it better to have it to give to my health insurer than be taking it out of my savings to give to the health insurer? So absolutely, there's a plus and a minus there. I don't think I'll be better off, but I think it helps me to look after my health insurance, which at my age is a very, very important item on my agenda.
Well, that's good. Happy days. At least you benefited from it, even if it's going to just go straight over into your health insurance premium. But as you said, it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the second question, Grandad, okay? if you were the Minister for Finance, would you be satisfied with the budget that they've released for 2025?
Well, we have to understand that there's going to be a general election in the next few years. In the next few months. And therefore, it's what they call a general election budget. In the old days, I'm going back to the 1960s, when Fianna Fáil was the government, what they did was, on the last budget, before the next general election, they cleaned out all the cash so that if a new party got into power, they didn't have any goodies to give away straight away. That's exactly what the Conservative Party have done in the UK, and the Labour Party are now facing, according to Rachel Reeves, their Chancellor of the Exchequer, a 28 billion deficit to start with. So that makes it very difficult for Labour to give out any goodies. And, unless Labour take the harsh decisions now in budget number 1, because remember, they're in for 5 years, they have a high majority. If you take most of the harsh decisions in budget number 1 and budget number 2, and then have a neutral budget number 3 and 4, and then a nice sweet budget again in budget number 5, they have a chance of getting re-elected. So good politicians clean out the coffers before the general election, make all the harsh decisions in the first budget or 2 after the general election, and then keep the goodies for when the budget before the next general election. And that's really what this government are doing. Am I satisfied, therefore, with what they're doing? Overall, I think I said to you, the population of Ireland has risen by 25% between 2007 and 2023. Now, 25% of an increase in the population is a serious increase in the population, and it's continuing to increase each year. Now, we had a population in the island of Ireland of 8 million before the potato famine in 1847, 8 and 9. And after that, the population fell as a result of the potato famine. 1 million people died and 1 million people emigrated. So the population of the island of Ireland went down to 6 million. Between that period of time, 1850 and 1960, in the next 110 years, even though we'd got our own government in power from 1922, the population went all the way down to about 4 million. Today, the population of the island of Ireland is almost 7.5 million. We're not back to pre-famine population yet, but we're getting very close to it. So with a big increase in population in a relatively short period of time, remember it took 110 years to get from 6 million down to 4 million. It only took us 17 years to get up by 25%. You have to ask yourself the question, have we 25% more hospitals? Have we 25% more houses? Have we 25% more teachers? Have we 25% more hospital beds? Have we 25% more doctors, nurses? So it does mean that you have to have a hugely consciousness that increasing populations have to be addressed in budgets. Now, they have done something in the budget in relation to increasing infrastructure. And they have appointed a minister for infrastructure for the first time. But there was no sense of urgency about what they have to do over the next 5, 6 or 7 years in order to get the infrastructure fit for purpose. And that would be the one thing that, as a Minister of Finance, I would be a little bit concerned about.
Okay. So what would you have done differently?
I think I would have set the context of the 25% increase in population. And what I've said is we're going to have to pump money in to infrastructure. Now, the experts, in other words, the economists, in other words, the fiscal advisory committee, whose job it is to comment on government spending, have said, no, this is a very poor budget. Because they have worked out a number, and what they're saying is 5% is what's the written down policy that government spending shouldn't go up by each year. And they reckon this budget is going to increase government spending by 12%. Now, firstly, I think the government need to change that 5% limit. If you want to keep inflation under control, you do need to have a limit of 5%. But if you want to greatly increase the infrastructure in the country to actually have enough nursing home beds, have enough hospital beds, have enough hospitals, doctors, teachers, schools, etc., the government has to pump money in, and that by its nature is inflationary. So I believe the government have to accept that inflation will be part, and high-ish inflation will be part of our lives going forward if we want to solve the infrastructure deficit. Now, I do believe, Adam, that if, for example, they build a whole lot of more hospitals, that means a whole lot more people will get work. And if a whole lot more people get work, that means they'll all pay more taxes. So the government will get more taxes. And I believe that future budgets should address A, infrastructure deficits, and B, shield those who are less able to deal with inflation in their daily lives from inflation through some kind of payments from the government. That's what I believe. And I think the extra taxes the government have should be used for those two purposes.
So you said earlier, when it's coming up to election times, the governments who have already been in power tend to structure the budget so that it's all the goodies, so that they get re-elected.
Yes.
So does that mean, based off what you said there, where they haven't pumped money into the infrastructure here in Ireland, does that mean infrastructure is something that's viewed in the eyes of the government as something that's not a goodie?
The trouble with infrastructure is, if you take the Children's Hospital, I think they're building that for 10 years now.
Yeah.
So infrastructure is a slow burn. And people know it'll be great when the new Children's Hospital is built. But in the meantime, people are saying we want the goodies now. And so therefore the government has to actually push for higher infrastructure spending and to protect those less able to deal with inflation and live with the consequences. And if they don't, you will find you won't be able to buy a house. I'll find I won't be able to get a nursing home place. We will find that we are affected. But it is a slow burn. It takes about 3 years now to get the planning permission for apartment blocks. Well, in other words, the National Maternity Hospital in Holles Street, it's in the centre of Dublin.
Yeah.
There was an agreement, it must be 10 years ago, to actually move and build a new National Maternity Hospital more fit for purpose alongside the general hospital called St. Vincent's Hospital in South Dublin. Not a shovel has hit the ground yet 10 years later. So they have to address these issues. Now, I know there's a planning bill going through the Parliament, but they need to actually sharpen their ability to actually move infrastructure much more quickly. Some countries can build things in 3 and 4 years. We can't build big infrastructure projects in 3 or 4 years. That is a huge issue for us.
That's very true.
And therefore, if they're keeping money aside for that and they're not spending it because they can't get planning, that's the worst of all possible worlds.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of restrictions around planning permission, residential and commercial. But Grandad, let me ask you a quick question, okay? You said that you believe the government should pump more money into infrastructure and then put up with the inflation as a result of this infrastructure being built, okay?
Yeah.
What would you say to the argument then that the focus of the budget, and maybe a reason why they haven't done that, is because a few years ago during the pandemic, everyone experienced a lot of inflation. Everyone noticed the cost of living significantly increase across all of their lives, whether it's you're going to a shop or let's say it's your health insurance or it's your fuel or whatever. Everyone noticed a significant increase in the cost of living. So what would you say to someone who would say, okay, let's say me, the reason why they're not pumping the money into the infrastructure is because if they were to do that, then the inflation will go up and then that would only add to the current strain on the cost of living for the average person?
I would say to you that the way the government are going to give out 125 euros, they're going to add that. They're going to pay that amount of my my energy costs in November, and another 125 euros they're going to pay in January. That's shielding me from energy cost increases. So, in other words, they have to find out where, if inflation does bite, and I think it should bite once they start to get infrastructure running, and hopefully they will, they have to find out where are the people who can't afford to live as a result of this and give them benefits.
Yeah.
And they will have the tax from the extra jobs that will arise as a result of all this stuff being built. And they use that tax to shield those that need to be shielded. It won't shield everybody, but it'll shield those that need to be shielded. That's the biggest issue for Ireland, that we don't have enough hospital beds. We have the fewest number of hospital beds per head in Europe, as far as I know. We have the fewest number of doctors per head in Europe. So health is very important,
Yeah, yeah.
And we have homelessness, all of that kind of stuff has to be addressed.
Yeah. I would agree. I think maybe a problem that we're really starting to experience now is urban sprawl. For example, let's say I was to go buy an affordable home, I have to literally leave Dublin. I have to go down to Wicklow, or I have to go out to, let's say, Navan, or, an area surrounding Dublin. And I think it's so silly in this day and age that, there's a height on property as well. I think we need to, what's the biggest building in Ireland, okay, or the tallest building in Ireland is, it's a residential property at the very, very top of the Grand Canal. The docks, not the Grand Canal. And it's only like 22 stories or something like that. Granted, how hard would it be, okay, to increase the limit from 22 stories to 40 stories? It wouldn't be it wouldn't ruin the skyline. And what's the benefit of having a beautiful skyline so that when you go for a walk up the mountains, you can look down, you can see across all the way to the airport? Do you know what I mean? I think these are silly rules that we still have from way back in the day that aren't being modernized now to meet the needs of people. If they could build up, they could build twice as many apartments going up instead of out. What's your thoughts?
Well, I'll put it this way, right? You do know that one of the things that the government did, because there's a shortage of apartments, rents were going through the ceiling.
Yeah.
So they brought in rent controls in the big cities, with the result that the developers are saying there's no margin in building apartments.
Yeah.
So, they do need to improve, to increase the rents. And if there are people who can't afford to pay the rents, then the state has to help them. Yeah. But the other thing, both my sons, independently, in discussing kind of economics and politics with the old fella, okay, both of them said to me, why is it that we can't buy a house in Roscommon, which is probably 100 miles from Dublin, get up in the morning, get into a high-speed train, and be at our office in Dublin within 45 minutes. Okay? In other words, there's more than one way to skin these cats. And the government needs to find ways to skin the cats. I mean, if you're in Wicklow and you can still get to your office within 45 minutes, happy days.
Yeah.
Okay? We have no high-speed trains in Ireland. And, it's a state firm and it's up to the government. And the government are constrained this way, that way, and the other way. They're still thinking about as if we were a poor country with our population going down and down and down and down. We're a population that's actually growing fast. And if it's growing fast, we have to borrow for infrastructure. Yeah. Even Joe Biden in the United States, he has passed one of the biggest infrastructure bills through Congress, and they're pumping money into infrastructure in the United States. And there has been a start made this time, and particularly the Apple money, that we got on a once-off basis, that they're saying they're going to put into infrastructure. But they need to be conscious of the fact that the population is increasing faster than our ability to manage it and to absorb it and to digest it. They're now saying that the number of houses or housing units, so that includes apartments and so on, the number of housing units required, and this is only recent that they're now saying if you want to solve the housing shortage in 10 years, we need to be building actually 70,000 houses a year. This year, we would build 35,000. And that, by the way, is an all-time high. It hasn't been that high since in almost 20 years, we haven't built as many as 35,000 houses. So effectively, we're halfway towards what's needed. And, your generation will be actually the ones that suffer because you'll be living with your mommy and your daddy for years because you won't be able to afford. If there's a shortage of houses, the house prices will go up. And that means the amount of money you've to put together to put down as a lump sum before you can get a mortgage from the bank will be increasing all the time. And, it's a major issue for the country.
Yeah. Grandad, are you happy with the current government?
I am. I think they've made improvements, right? But I just don't think the sense of urgency. They're busy trying to show what a good job they've done, right? But there's a sense of urgency required there that's not coming out from any of the political parties. They haven't put Ireland in the new context of a fast-growing country. And what impact has that got on services? I can tell you that down in Roscrea, when they brought in Ukrainian refugees, and the local hotel decided to actually allow those Ukrainian refugees to live in that hotel. And in fact, as a result of that, there was no hotel in Roscrea, in the town of Roscrea. So the government were forced to give the town of Roscrea money to take another hotel which was on its last legs and refurbish it and put it together so that people could have their funerals in the hotel, people could have their weddings in the hotel, and tourists could come to the town, right? And that's just one example of how the government were blindsided. They should never have agreed to put the refugees into the hotel without ensuring and reassuring the people that there would be a hotel to take its place. And that's the reason why immigration is so unpopular, because the communities that are taking the immigrants feel that they're being hung out to dry because where they at the moment don't have enough doctors in the town. When you get another 300 refugees, they can't get another doctor. So, this is a major issue for the political world. And I don't think it's really, the urgency doesn't seem to be coming across to me. I mean, what happened was that the government came out and said, look what a fine job. Look how much we're spending now. The Fiscal Advisory Committee came out and said, you're spending way too much. And the opposition came out and said, no, we'd spend the money differently. They didn't say they wouldn't spend it. They said, we'd spend the money differently, right? Yeah. So effectively, there's no sense of urgency that we're at a popping stage here.
Yeah. I think as well, the whole immigration issue was very poor timing. You know, I think... But I also think a lot of it is out of the government's control. I think a lot of it is EU regulations. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what I would assume.
Well, I think
we're obliged
also,
to take them because we're a part of this massive union and every other country's taken
them. Well, I think also, don't forget this much, right? What happened to the population of Ireland, you know, when we had the potato famine, is 1 million people took the emigrant boat.
Yeah.
And every year, right up to the 1980s, I mean, your own father ended up in England after he finished school.
Yeah.
Okay? So we were a nation up to the 1980s where we depended on the goodwill of other countries taking us in as immigrants.
Yeah.
So when the Ukrainians were looking for a place to go, we put our hands up and said, oh yeah, we you know, it's our turn to give something back here. And anyway, the population is rising so fast. We need workers to be coming in here. Okay. Yeah. So the trouble is the difference between the theory and the practice is the problem. Everybody said, yeah, we should have more immigrants in here. But everybody else said, but not in our backyard.
Yeah.
And that's where the government, I don't think they had a holistic approach to immigration when it started because they weren't used to it. And I think they're getting better at that now.
Okay. So, Grandad, next question. How will the budget for 2025 affect publicly listed Irish companies or Irish companies that are trading in the stock market? Has this budget given you any investment ideas that you'd be willing to share?
Well, one of the fastest growing Irish shares I have, it's a tiny company. It's got a market capitalization of $1 billion. Okay. Now, if an American stock investor standing in the NASDAQ or the New York stock market, if he blinked with his left eye, the $1 billion would be gone. You know, it's such a small company.
Be like a penny stock over there.
Yeah, but the issue here is I'm up at 74% in the year in the share.
Happy days.
74% is happy days, right?
Yeah.
And what company is it? It's a building company. Now, having listened to what I'm saying and having listened to what I think will happen in the future one way or the other, do you think investing in a building company called Cairn Homes is a good idea?
I think in the long term it would be a good idea, but the price may be overinflated now after the new budget or, you know, but I think in the long term it'd be a good idea, yeah.
Well, it certainly
Makes
has
sense.
it has a good outlook.
Makes sense, yeah.
Okay. Now, then if you take it that we are an island state, this is a share that I profiled in the book. It's called the Irish Continental Group. And what it is, it's the ferry company between Ireland, the UK, and Ireland and Europe. We are an island state. So all the goods that we receive into the country and all the goods that we send out of the country, the vast majority of them go via the ferry companies. This is the dominant ferry company in Ireland. Okay. I made a humongous amount of money on this 10 years ago. But I'm looking at it again and I'm saying to myself, you know, what's the outlook for this company? Well, if the country continues growing as it is, the outlook for this company must be good. So there's two examples of two shares in Ireland that I think are worth investing in. There are more, but I just picked just those two because they're easy to understand.
When you say Irish Continental Group or the owner of Irish Ferries, do they also own, freight
Irish
ships
Ferries,
as well, or the massive ones, the cargo ships?
Irish Ferries do all. The bulk of the goods coming in and out of Ireland by ferry are done by Irish Continental Group.
So it's not just
not just cars and people
go on. Okay, yeah.
But they have the bulk of everything because there's they are the Irish company, and people tend to use them, and they know how to actually sell to the Irish. Okay. So effectively, they're starting to expand overseas as well, because believe it or not, even though the UK doesn't really understand this, they're an island country as well. Right? So they have all their stuff going across to France and Spain and Holland, and Denmark, right? So Irish ferries have started to expand into that trade as well.
Okay, interesting. So you'd be looking at, residential, or maybe they do commercial as well. I don't know, building companies, and also.
Oh yeah, they do the works.
Yeah.
And you see, the government want to build 70,000 or 50. The latest Prime Minister said he wanted a target set of 50,000 per annum houses. Okay. Now, where are they going to get the builders?
Yeah.
They have to go to Cairn Homes, and there's another one, Glenveigh Homes, and there's a few private ones as well. But Cairn Homes is the most successful of all those.
Okay, that's very interesting. I'm definitely going to have a look at that one. So I don't know about the ferry ones. I don't know.
The dividend isn't great, by the way.
Right.
But and I'm a dividend chaser. But every now and again, if there's a compelling case for assuming that the shares will go up in value, I'll sacrifice low dividends. Now, I've something like 60 shares, right? There might be 6 or 7 of them have low dividends. The rest don't. And those are the ones that I'm watching the whole time and saying, when is the turn going to come in the share price? If it's going to turn down, get the hell out, right? Yeah. Whereas the other ones, if the share price falls and I'm still getting 6 or 7% of a dividend yield on it, I might just say, well, that's fine. Don't worry about that.
Okay. Well, I think this has been a very interesting podcast, Grandad. I'd be interested to know what the people at home think of what we discuss in this podcast. So please, if you're listening to this on YouTube, comment down below, shoot us a message on Instagram, or send us an email and let us know what you think of the budget 2025. Also, quickly, if you have not got yourself a copy of Grandad's new book, Successful Investing, How to Make Money in the Stock Market from Real Life Experience, make sure you go and grab yourself a copy. The links can be found down in the description below. Also, follow us on Instagram and TikTok at The Investment Hound. Thank you very much for listening. We will be doing another podcast next week and the week after and the week after until we get into that top 3.6 percentile of number one or episodes in the world or whatever. So thank you very much. Anything you'd like to say, Grandad?
Well, rock on and invest. Buy the book and learn how to invest. It's the best way to save. I always talk about AIB. I bought the shares at €2. They're now €5. So I'm up over 200% profit on the shares. The current dividend yield on the current price of AIB is 5%. But because I bought it at, and then the share price is 5, because I bought those at 2, I'm getting 5% on €5, but I'm getting it on €2. I'm almost at 15% dividend yield on AIB. Why would I put my money on deposit in AIB when I can get almost 15% if I buy the shares in AIB?
And I must say, okay, and people will think this is a biased opinion, but genuinely, this is as neutral as possible. The book is unbelievably informative on how to approach the stock market as a beginner investor. And when you're reading it, you will, and I can guarantee you will come up with your own investment ideas as well. May not be good, but you will come up with your own investment ideas, okay? So make sure you go grab yourself a copy. I would highly recommend it. I'm putting it on to all my friends and all the family members have already read it, but make sure you go grab yourself a copy. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week.
Cheers, everybody. And don't forget, buy the books. I need the money.